much. You talked about the spread of fake news, the spread of fake information, and we all agree that traditional media is not the only place where fake news is dominating. We also have, if not even more so, social media. So what are the downsides of social media, if I may say so? And for example, in terms of how it has allowed for the rapid spread of fake news, and also for the ability for populists to spread misinformation.
Absolutely. So firstly, social media, as Yasha Munk said earlier today, it's not all bad, but it's not all good either. It's a little bit of a grey on grey area, as he said, and I have to agree with that. And just a little anecdote. There's a reporter that I've worked with at several publications that I've worked at, and she's a really good reporter who's also was very into social media. And she was once reporting on a breaking news event, and she's the kind of person who got so into social media, built a massive following that she would break stories real time. And this was a story about someone who had died. And as she was live reporting this, she revealed the name of the person who died before their family had been informed. And you could see how she was caught up in the kind of speed of that medium and forgot her basic journalism training. And she obviously kicked herself later and realized what a bad mistake she's made. And it shows you how social media can be very seductive to us as journalists, and we want to keep up with it. We want to keep up with the speed that it demonstrates, but at what sacrifice? And that's what we have to be aware of. Now, on the flip side, this journalist is also very, very good at understanding what the audience is interested in. And I want to come back to what Ginna said about the bubble we sometimes find ourselves in as newsrooms. And social media and getting out into the field is one way to break that, one way to really understand where your audience's head is at. So social media, good and bad. Now, I think one of the ways that social media has actually strengthened traditional quality media comes back to something that Serge kind of spoke about. Because of the rise of fake news and generally how unreliable so much of the information on social media can be, this has pushed a lot of our audiences to rely on traditional outlets more than ever. With that comes the responsibility for journalists to be more thorough, rigorous, and thoughtful in our coverage. But the danger is that we're not doing that because, again, we're competing with this medium. And that's when our standards start to slip. So as others have noted, and I think it's become a theme of today's event, when we do what we traditionally do best, quality journalism, that's when we come out on top. Now, another way that social media has perhaps weakened traditional quality journalism is, as I've said, created this expectation and this pressure for us to be first at the expense of deeper analysis and meaning. We create endless iterations of breaking news, just breaking news after breaking news, endless updates. You get repeated updates, and there isn't time for the audience member to breathe and go, what does this mean? What is the larger story here? Reader survey after reader survey that I have seen emphasize that people want to understand the bigger picture. What is the larger story? And of course, a major threat of social media, something we've spoken about a lot today, and that is fake news. In the organized sense of the term, and also just the proliferation of lies or alternative facts on social media. In South Africa, fake news has unfortunately achieved a high level of organization, with those disseminating false facts, false news, fake news websites, and paid social media campaigns and users. They've actually paid social media users to attack investigative journalists who are exposing their wrongdoing. So you have, and this is of course all alleged, and there's still a lot of reporting going into this, but you have some dubious people in the South African landscape who are literally allegedly orchestrating these massive fake news campaigns to discredit journalists who are trying to expose their wrongdoing. So that's when you can see that fake news is extremely dangerous towards quality journalism. And finally, I think the way social media really weakens the work of traditional media is by weakening our audience through confirmation bias, as was mentioned by Ms. Irina Bokova and others today. I increasingly see, and this is particularly true of the younger generation, I increasingly see audiences, especially politicized and politically radical young audiences, becoming highly suspicious of traditional media as part of railing against the establishment. And so instead of relying on traditional media who have established methods of working out fact from fiction and, as someone said earlier today, taking responsibility when we make a mistake, they rely on conspiracy theories being pushed by alternative outlets and influencers on social media with none of the rigor or checks of traditional media. Now, we haven't done ourselves any favors here when we've been sloppy in our journalism to compete in an increasingly frenetic digital and social media space and made mistakes. WEF President Marcelo Reck had it right when he said we need a rigorous commitment to quality journalism. This is how we will build trust with audiences who will continue to rely on us in an age of social media that is increasingly unreliable in the facts that it puts out.
You mentioned both traditional media and social media and the whole issue about fake news, but then traditional media can still use social media. I mean, you're using it in your work right now. How can traditional media use social media to reach a bigger audience and also to better inform the people?
Okay, so to come on. So one thing that we already mentioned is using it to break out of the media echo chamber. So we all, kind of hit ourselves over the head for not seeing the Trump victory, not realizing, not being plugged in to a section of the audience that was feeling increasingly alienated and disenfranchised. And that's not just in America. I can think of examples in my country where we've made that mistake and we've called something and completely missed the mood of the country. And I think as more and more people start using social media, it's a useful way to gauge topics of interest outside of our echo chamber. Another way we could really use social media, and I'm very mindful of what some speakers have spoken about how thinly stretched journalists are expected to be, and I do feel it's unfair and it really threatens our quality of journalism. The gentleman from Al Jazeera speaking about how they're just on every platform. If you're from a smaller outlet, don't try to compete with that. What we try to do at Huffington Post South Africa is just to choose carefully. We choose just literally 2 social media platforms that we try to do really well because there's so few of us. And to have your journalists out there periscoping and Facebook living and Snapchatting is really going to affect the quality of your journalism. What I would often try to do is send out a journalist, a journalist just to focus on social media for a story so that another journalist can do the deeper work, can doorstop politicians and think a little bit deeper about the topic they're covering. So that's one of my pieces of advice, just choose carefully, don't try to do it all. And finally, I'd like to talk about how we use social media to get a little less maybe condescending towards our audience. I don't know if that's a bit controversial, but Pointer Institute wrote about what Jennifer Brandel of the startup Here Can spoke about. She spoke about last year the serious problem the news industry does not talk about. And she said, reporters, editors, and managers alike have such disdain for their audiences. In conversations with newsrooms, we've witnessed this disdain range from subtle annoyance to straight-up hatred. So, like I said, a little bit controversial. And this remark came out of a larger study about journalist comments about audience members and audience comments about journalists and the outlets that they subscribe to. And the kind of repeated thing that came out was that they felt that they just were not being heard by journalists and newsrooms. So with social media, we have the tools more than ever to listen to our audience, but sadly not the will. The report went on to say that perhaps this hatred of our audience comes out of a deep sadness that they don't appreciate the work we do and are often quite hostile towards us as journalists. But between the trolls who insult us, and I'm sure we've all experienced that, there are incredibly valuable insights that we can and should plug into as journalists. We need to learn to listen and talk to our audiences far more. As Mr. Frank LaRue pointed out, the internet revolutionized the very nature of media mass communication. It's become a conversation. So we shouldn't talk at our audiences anymore, the way media did pre-social media. So I think my final tip would be that publishers that just put out links won't build a rapport. They need to engage and use social media to identify diverse voices and topics close to the audience's heart.